here at Florida Southern College, where we can find the most comprehensive architecture of the Frank Lloyd Wright's collection. We're going to hear from the director of the Visitor Center about Frank Lloyd Wright's life and this amazing architecture. Come encounter it with me.
We are so proud of what we have here at the college. Not only is it a college of high academic standards, but it's a college of beauty. We have the very fortunate luck of having 13 Frank Lloyd Wright designed structures on our campus, 12 original structures, and a new structure that was built about 2 years ago that was supposed to be built in 1939, and we completed it in 2013. They came to Lakeland in 1922. That was already the fourth campus of the college. They built traditional brick buildings like most college campuses have. And not too long thereafter, of course, the Great Depression comes along. Things get very dicey financially. But at that point, after a few years, we had a very dynamic president. His name was Dr. Lud Spivey. And Dr. Spivey wanted to expand the campus in the middle of the Depression. And he wants to make a statement. He wants dramatic architecture that he figures would attract students to come to the school. And he was proven correct. He wanted the greatest architect there is. He sent a telegram to Frank Lloyd Wright in 1938. We want to build a temple to education. We want you to be our architect. What he's essentially doing is hiring Frank Lloyd Wright on the spot. The two men had never spoken, never talked to each other whatsoever, but he hires Frank Lloyd Wright. Mr. Wright comes here to the campus. He was already 70 years old, by the way, and the two men discussed what Dr. Spivey wanted the college to be. And this is a perfect Frank Lloyd Wright setting. He loved gently sloping hillsides, and we have one that slopes down to a beautiful lake. Wright goes back to his estate, his school, his house in Wisconsin called Taliesin, and he designs the entire plan. He designs the master plan and initially 18 structures to be built. Ultimately, 12 of those were constructed. He went on to design dozens of other structures. We went on throughout the years, and most of these were built either during the Depression or World War II years. After the war, a few additional buildings were built. Now, how would the school be able to get this constructed in the Depression? Really still very much of a struggle financially. Well, we had the students provide most of the labor in lieu of tuition. So that in itself is a unique story, to have students build the buildings they're being educated in. Some buildings were built fairly quickly. Others, long time. The library was built during World War II. They couldn't get materials. That went on almost 4 years to get one building constructed. on for 20 years. The last structure completed was in 1958. Frank Lloyd Wright was a very visionary architect. What astounds people is the year he was born, 1867, 2 years after the Civil War ended. He was from Wisconsin. A mind like his comes across only every couple hundred years. And he had a very colorful life. He had an architectural practice, an architectural school. He was probably the truest definition of the word artist. He sort of did what he wanted, when he wanted, and with who he wanted to do it with. So he was a gentleman that some people were offended by. They didn't like that colorful lifestyle. But he truly was a genius, a visionary, sometimes very difficult to work with, but absolutely a wonderful person. He would work with the clients. People said he has this reputation of not working with his clients, and that's not totally true. He would work with the clients as long as the client's wishes didn't change his overall scheme and his plan. But if a client wanted additional windows or wanted whatever, he would accommodate that. Each one is unique, but common. Common design elements. They're built with what's called textile blocks. A textile block is a very thin, narrow block made of concrete. These generally, many of them have holes going right through them. And he said, fill the holes with colored pieces of glass. So when the sun shines, it's like little jewels coming into the building. He had a way of taking and molding a structure. He was in command of the space, of the light, of the materials, of the view. He controlled how the building was built and used. And so sometimes as time went on, might have been a conflict between how we wanted to use it and how it was designed to be used. As you enter any Frank Lloyd Wright structure, you immediately are confronted with a low ceiling. And that is Mr. Wright's way of controlling your mind, bringing you down. It's called compression. And generally, you step into the middle of the building and the ceilings soar. That's called expansion. So he can take a relatively small building and make it feel expansive, much bigger than what it really is, because of the changes in the ceiling heights and how it's put together. In 1959, Frank Lloyd Wright died, and that really drew to a close the project between the school and Frank Lloyd Wright. Most of them were never realized until this house was built, but we do have 12 original structures built in his lifetime, and this one built a few years ago. What you see behind me is the Annie Pfeiffer Chapel. This is the first structure that was built on the campus, completed in 1941. And you see the dramatic belfry. The belfry never had bells. And what you see are bow ties. There are 3 bow ties. And in the center part, there's a planter. And Mr. Wright envisioned vines planted in those planters with flowers climbing up and hanging down. Of course, that proves impractical. The Annie Pfeiffer Chapel is the first structure, is the oldest structure on the campus. It was recently renovated on the inside. Copies of all the original seating was put back in place. The floor was restored. The podium area was restored back to its original design as well. As funding comes across, we'll do more. We'll do some of the exterior renovation and a little bit more inside. In the background, you see the seminar buildings. These are classroom buildings. They were completed in 1941. They were actually buildings 2, 3, and 4 of the 12 original structures that were built. And each building consisted of 1 classroom and 2 offices with a courtyard between each building filled with trees and flowers. Very natural, very beautiful. In the 1950s, they were converted to office buildings, which is what they're used for now, but they were originally seminars. We have almost 1.5 miles of covered walkways that connect all of Mr. Wright's buildings except one. And they were intended for students to move from building to building, keeping them sheltered from the rain and from the intense sun. And they're absolutely fascinating angles, and the sun hits them. They're different every moment of the day. Always appearing with light some places, shadows other places. Absolutely stunning. In the back of me, you see our 2 administration buildings, the Watson Building and the Fine Building. These were the first structures built after World War II. And if you remember earlier, I told you that students provided much of the labor before that. Well, after World War II, we hired contractors, and these are the first buildings built with contracting. And you will also notice that the blocks themselves are much more simple. Prior to this, many of the blocks had the pierced openings with colored glass. From this building on, has very little of that. Very unique things. There's a small courtyard between the 2. The covered walkways, which connect all of Mr. Wright's buildings, go right between the 2 buildings. It's absolutely a dramatic effect. The Watson Building contains the President's office. Dr. Kerr's office is the same place that Mr. Wright designed the President's office to be. This is one of 6 features we have here in Lakeland, Florida, of Frank Lloyd Wright Architecture that's nowhere else in the world. This is the largest water feature he ever designed. It was not completed to his design until 2007. It had been originally a large pond without the water flowing, the fountains, and in 2007 we restored it and included the fountains that shoot 45 feet in the air, which is pretty remarkable. The technology just was not there when he designed it, and it wasn't until 2007 we got it completed. A little bit of social engineering on his part to bring the family together. In the Depression, the blocks were made with high pressure treated concrete. It's much more dense than the original concrete.
You wanted to be a teacher when you were little, but things changed. Teaching didn't seem that cool anymore, so you decided to become something else. But what would your 12-year-old self say? Amazing things are happening in teaching, so it's time to put it back on your list. Don't try to convince yourself otherwise. You had it right the first time.
Connor is struggling in school.
Finding lowest airfare to Istanbul.
Why don't you understand me?
I do. This is what it feels like for kids with learning and attention issues. Redirecting to understood.org.
This is the next to the last building completed. It was done so in 1955. It is a small chapel that's very dramatic. The incredible window is one of our features that's nowhere else in the world. This is the last stained glass window of Mr. Wright's career. And he, of course, was famous for his windows. When you look at it, the wooden mullions are parallelograms. There is not one right angle in the entire structure. This building is the most true to what it was initially. It has the original Cherokee red floors, the original seating that was designed by Mr. Wright, the podium designed by Mr. Wright, all the windows up above and the side open, the bottom parts open for ventilation, all those triangles. It's a small building done with a lot of tricks to make it appear much larger than what it really is. When you see that dramatic window, there is no frame on the top. And the glass is clear, allowing you to see the lights moving from the inside to the outside. And you'll notice he left the very center panel of the window clear. He's drawing you out. He's making this little building that was designed to seat just 75 people appear much, much larger than what it was. This building is one that was donated to the school by Mr. Danforth. He was from St. Louis, Missouri, and his passion was donating chapels. There are 23 Danforth chapels across the nation. This is a Usonian style house. It was designed for the family to live pretty much in this one room most of the time. Bedrooms were small, kitchens were small. It was also a little bit of social engineering on his part to bring the family together in the Depression. And the Usonian houses would turn their backs to the street. The street side of the house had hardly any windows. So he's shutting out the big bad world of the Depression. Now, we built our house with the windows facing the streets for the tourists so they can see. But generally, this would have faced a private garden. It would have been very, very private. The family surrounded by nature. You can't help but see through all those windows birds and trees and flowers and sky. You're intimate with the environment that you're living in. The house was a shelter to be lived in during the day and go off to the small bedroom at night. These houses, for instance, were designed for the average American to be built in the middle of the Great Depression. They would have cost between $8,000 and $10,000 back then, which is the same as pretty much any little bungalow would have cost in Lakeland at the same time. Now, of course, it's much different. As the economy got better, the houses got bigger, much more elaborate. By the 1950s, you couldn't tell one of his houses from something being built today. Kitchens had islands, and it was much more elaborate. But this was very economical. The cheapest construction that you can do was a box. So he put flat roofs on the houses. As time went on, they of course soared and slanted and all sorts of dramatic angles. He was an incredibly visionary person, and he could picture things. And I think one of his big challenges is trying to pass his vision on to the client and the builder of what it was supposed to be like. He would do beautiful, beautiful colored rendering drawings of the structures to try to give them an idea. But he was so far ahead of his time. Even today, most of the houses you can walk in and they're right at home, even though they're 60, 70, 80 years old. We are in a major restoration effort thanks to our current president, Dr. Ann Kerr, who saw what's here and the need to preserve it. And we're slowly, based on funding, restoring all of the structures back to their original appearance and function as much as we can, keeping in mind this is a working college and that comes first. Dr. Kerr is not only substantially behind the restoration effort, but the beauty of the campus. So the ongoing efforts, and it will continue for a while. We have a lot of work to do, a lot of restoration to do, but we appreciate everything that's happening. The original buildings were built with concrete blocks on campus by putting concrete into a wooden mold. And the blocks were stacked together with small steel bars between them, both vertically and horizontally. Well, throughout the years, moisture would get in, they would rust the steel bar, it would crack the block. So the ongoing restoration, that all has to be done, and they're being restored with 21st century materials and systems. For instance, this house, the blocks were made with high pressure treated concrete. It's much more dense than the original concrete.
Wow. Wow. This thing's still amazing. There you go. Nice job, Tom. Ready, Mike? I did. I think you got it right that second time.
The steel bars are stainless steel. They don't rust. These are insulated. The original buildings were not even insulated. They weren't air conditioned. And once you introduce air conditioning into a building, it changes the entire nature of the building and how it has to be built to handle air conditioning. So the restoration efforts is not only to bring it back, but to bring it back using 21st century materials. And then in some cases, how are we going to use the building? Some cases we may have to build a different building for a certain function that's housed in a right structure. So that becomes another very expensive proposition to handle all of that. So the restoration efforts are slow and expensive. After his death, the architect that the school used was one of Mr. Wright's apprentices. And for the next almost 40 years, this man designed almost all the major buildings on the campus. And today we use an architect for many of the structures, Robert A.M. Stern. And Dr. Stern was the head of Yale School of Architecture, and his practice is in New York City. We also use local architects. And you will see in many of the newer buildings, some of the design elements are incorporated in a new way that enhances the right structures that are already on site. They try not to fight each other, they make it blend in. People don't realize, or may not realize, that for 10 years running, we have been listed as one of the 10 most beautiful campuses in the entire United States. For 2 of those years, we were #1 in the nation. So that had never happened before, and that was pretty special. We have thousands of visitors who come to see these structures from around the world. 20% of our visitors are from outside the United States. And they come because not only is it unique, the architecture, but they also come because of the man. He has this reputation of these quirky buildings, and they are, quite frankly, sometimes very unique, challenging to work in sometimes. We get thousands and thousands of visitors who come all the time to see this incredible architecture. We are open 7 days a week from 9:30 until 4:30. We have a wide variety of tours. We have people can do a self-guided tour, walk around on their own, but they can't go inside the structures when they do that, other than our chapel. We have tours that are 1 hour, 2 hours. The difference between those two is the 2 hour takes the visitor inside all of the buildings, and that is our most popular tour. We have even a behind-the-scenes tour for the true fan that wants to see behind the scenes and some of the nooks and crannies that we can take visitors to. One of our challenges, of course, is making sure we don't disrupt classes and workers, and that becomes a challenge because sometimes there's a lot of tours, a lot of people. We have almost all the tours 5 days a week. The behind the scenes is by reservation. All the rest are conducted 5 tours a day, so we always encourage reservations. Walk-in guests are accommodated based on availability. We have a gift shop for people to buy souvenirs or other types of items. Almost everything is licensed by the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation. We are an official Frank Lloyd Wright visitors site, one of the few in the nation. And people can buy just about anything they desire. And we look forward to having visitors. We encourage people, especially people from Polk County. A lot of times, we don't see what's in our own backyard. And so we encourage people to come.
Thank you for coming with us to encounter the Frank Lloyd Wright architecture. It is exquisite, beautiful, and unique to Florida Southern College. I hope you've enjoyed it.